of those things. These were what we called from payphones to call home and let mom and dad know that we were ready to come home, but we only let it ring once so that we didn't have to pay for the call. It was remarkable, the things that we did with these phones. How about these? This is what we use to plan our vacations. This is what we use to get around for years and years and years. If you wanted to ride shotgun on a trip, you also risked being the navigator for the trip, which meant no naps in the front right of the vehicle. And as valuable as those things are and were, what's happened is that we have moved on. There are things that we are able to do now. Your GPS tells you what you need to know, including estimated time of arrival, construction, road hazards, gas stations, and that you might want to slow down, at least temporarily. Vitally important, the best of what was available in their day, but I doubt if any of us would be willing to trade our smartphones for a push-button landline phone or our GPS for an old atlas. It just isn't going to happen. Here's the heart of it. Most people use out-of-date methods to create visual messages because they don't know what's been discovered yet. And in the time we have together, I'm going to show you how to bring your visual communication up to date. It's faster, it's leaner, more effective than what you've been doing in communicating with your connections. And I hope you decide to learn it and use it. Okay, you can park your cell phone again. Make sure it's on silent or whatever. There will be time for Q&A at the end of this hour, and you may want to note the slide number at the bottom right of each slide as you craft your question. It may help us if we have to come back to it, all right? So what makes this 21st century way of writing faster, leaner, and more effective? Current writing is based on the way we were taught to write, which was the best of what was known at that time. Generally speaking, it was based on tradition, what people have always done, what they've come to expect, and practices based on their observations and preferences, on personal experiences and opinions, hopefully well-founded opinions. Most current presentations, like PowerPoint and keynotes, are created the way we were taught to develop them, which, like our writing, was based on what was known at the time. Tradition, again, those long-standing norms on observations by and preferences of people in the field, personal experiences and opinions, or you may have taught yourself, applying things you learned through reading observations, experimenting with the software, watching tutorials, YouTube videos. I'm going to go full screen in a moment here, and I'd like for you to maximize your shared screen view for the next several minutes so that you can see what happens on screen as we go, and so that you know, screenshots are fine. All right. Thanks to modern technology and continuing research, we have learned much about how the brain actually processes information. We can observe where things happen in the brain as we read. We can follow a reader's eyes, learn where they go, and how long they stay. If you're watching on a large enough screen, can you see the number 1 in that latest picture? The human eye always finds the face first when things come up, and from there it goes other places. What we have learned, we call them scientific findings, indicates that there are better, more effective ways to create material based on how we actually process information. And these findings have created a new area of study called cognitive-based information that looks exclusively at how we actually process visual information. And the tool to create this type of information is called cognitive-based information design, or CID. Based solely on science, CID provides a systematic way of ensuring that visual communication uses what we know about how the brain processes visual information. Today, we're going to learn about 3 of those scientific findings that can help guide you in creating more effective documents, presentations, and emails. So you know what SID is now, but to better understand the significance of those three findings, you need to be clear on why SID is important in your work. SID can benefit all fields of endeavor, and those are highlighted on the sidgroup.com. That's a screenshot of it. SID can benefit all fields. In the business field alone, we know that there are pressing needs for it, one of those being financial. So, why is SID so important? Let's find out. SID came about to meet a challenge facing our society that's received little attention, and you need to be aware of it in your quest to communicate effectively. The problem, or the challenge as we prefer to call it, is the current state of adult reading literacy in this country. A few years ago, Dr. Tetlin wanted to know how many adults in this country were proficient in reading literacy. She found a study by the National Center for Education Statistics that assessed the reading literacy of adults in the United States. In this study, thousands of adults aged 16 to 65 were tested. The population was across gender, educational levels, and socioeconomic status. Reading literacy was defined as the knowledge and skills needed in life and at work to accurately use information from various platforms, such as text-based documents, news stories and editorials, manuals, and brochures. And the study included various formats, maps, tables, charts, forms, and timetables. The test questions assess the respondent's ability to retrieve, compare, integrate, and synthesize information and make inferences and other skills. This was a very thorough, well-designed study with a large, diverse population. And as a professional researcher, Dr. Tetlin knew that prior to reading such a dense study, she had to focus on what she wanted to learn from it. If she hadn't done that, the data you're about to see would not have been found. She wanted to know how many adults are proficient at understanding what they read. And this is what she found. Their findings are startling, but when you go to the study, you'll not see it shown this way. The study had subcategories within that 87%, intermediate, basic, and below basic. The study didn't present or address the 87% figure, probably because it was a study for educators who need to know the variations within the below proficient category so they could better design effective methodologies and pedagogies. In the working world, it's vital to fully understand information that's read, not just partially understand it. And according to this study, most adults in the US don't accurately apply what they read. This cross-section of adults, by the way, includes the people we work with, the people we serve. And a side note here, it's not just a United States issue. Other studies show that this is global. What's not addressed in this study is the fact that most of us believe we do understand correctly, even when we do not. And still others believe it's all right to kind of understand something. In the adult world, we cannot afford to accept things that are just kind of okay. Do you remember this AT&T commercial?
Have you ever worked with Dr. Francis? Oh yeah, he's okay.
Just okay?
Guess who just got reinstated? Well, not officially. Nervous?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. I'll see you in there.
Just okay is not okay.
No kidding. Just okay is not okay. The job is either done correctly or there are negative consequences. And many of those consequences affect profitability, safety, and recovering loss from avoidable mistakes. On May 11th, 1996, an employee of ValueJet Airlines misinterpreted loading instructions. And Flight 592 took off from Miami, Florida, and 10 minutes later crashed in the Everglades. All 110 lives were lost. Why? The employee thought he was loading the cargo correctly, but the way he interpreted the manual was wrong. Valentine's Day, New Mexico, a storage drum leaked, releasing particles into the ventilation system, and 21 employees were exposed to radioactive materials. The cause? An employee misunderstood proper storage procedures. The owner of this beautiful historic chateau outside Paris provided written instructions to his construction crew to renovate the chateau and raise a small outbuilding. They misunderstood the instructions. A 2013-2014 Towers-Watson study revealed that ineffective communication to employees and between employees resulted in over $62 million of lost income per year for each of over 400 companies surveyed. It found that an organization with 100 employees spends 17 hours a week clarifying communication. That downtime accounts for over 40% of a 40-hour work week. The annual cost for clearing things up each year, over $500,000 per year per company. Based on those numbers, a company with 50 employees will spend over $250,000 on clarification. And companies with 250 employees should expect to spend over $1 million each year on clarifications. 70% of small to mid-sized organizations claim that ineffective communication is their primary problem. And the study found that companies with highly effective communications outperform their industry peers by over 3 times. So the consequences of poor communication are measurable, but they're not limited to finance. Misunderstanding information can result in a spectrum of negative consequences, everything from manufacturing mistakes to taking the wrong medication, from minor frustrations to major catastrophes. Why do we tend to misinterpret what we read? Well, there are several possible reasons that we should consider. It could be that we're reading too fast or misreading words. Maybe it's a lack of vocabulary, or not fully engaging with the content when we read. Perhaps the reason is a dislike of reading. Cultural influences could be a contributing factor. Past negative experiences can get in the way, and so forth. These and other variables have been studied for some time without solving the problem, but one variable that has received little attention may very well be the kingpin to this whole problem, and that is formatting information. The way we currently present information doesn't coincide with what we now know about how the brain processes visual information. Many of our current formats discourage readers from engaging, undermine proper understanding of content, and actually frustrate recall and retrieval of information. For instance, current formats often present information with disjointed sequences, long run-on lines of text, cumbersome fonts, to name a few. We have found that when information is presented using known scientific findings to create the formats, readers are more likely to stay engaged with the material, correctly understand the content, and be able to recall or locate pertinent details easily. So the next obvious question is, what are these findings, right? As we get started, let's make sure we're clear on the meaning and that we're using the same definition. Findings are truths discovered through scientific research that are accepted as valid by their peers. And SID incorporates findings from, but not limited to, these fields. SID is unique in that it bases design instructions on proven scientific findings and not on previously held opinions and tradition. It's for visual communication, that is, any flat material, print or electronic, such as these. Watch your screen. SID is intended for formats that show procedural knowledge or provide knowledge on a given subject. It's important to note that SID was not created for novels, for poetry, and other forms of emotive writing like you might find in some advertising or marketing. While they may benefit from its techniques, SID does not address the emotive elements of cognition. We're going to explore today 3 of SID's 17 findings. These may be new terms to you, and you need to add them to your vocabulary. No need to understand them right now, but since your brain needs to see new words or terms 3 times to recognize and remember them, this is the first. Visual processing, text deconstruction. Information processing model, chunking. And rapid sequential visual presentation, RSVP. This slide also answers the question, where are we going today? We're going to apply those 3 to documents, and then to presentations, and finally to emails. Now that you know what SID is and why it's important, you know where we're headed today, let's look at those findings, beginning with visual processing and text deconstruction. I'm going to slip into teach mode, so focus on the screens for the next few minutes. You'll see the changes happen that I'm talking about today. And yes, screenshots are okay. Are you ready? Let's go. Visual information enters through the eye and proceeds across the optic system to the back of our heads to the visual cortex. And this is the first level of cognitive processing, from the eye to the visual cortex. Upon reaching the visual cortex, the brain determines what it's seeing. Is this an image, a color, a letter, and so forth? And when it's identified as a letter, it's sent to an area called the letter box for further evaluation. There, the letter box is decoded and then recoded, and this is the second level of cognitive processing. Those recoded images are then sent further into the brain for higher order interpretations, and this is the third level of cognitive processing. Let's look at what happens when the brain sees text. When you see the word I, for example, the brain recognizes it as text and sends it to the letter box, where it breaks the word into individual letters, takes one letter at a time, sorts the pieces into similar shapes, horizontal lines, vertical lines, curves, and so forth, and then it recodes it to its original form for further processing. Knowing that this text deconstruction exists helps us determine whether we should use serif or sans serif fonts. These are examples of serif on the left and sans serif on the right. Notice that the serif font has little decorative lines added to the basic form of the letter. Sans serif has none. So the serif T on the left has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines to decode and then recode. The sans serif T on the right has 2. By the way, serif and sans serif are font categories, not usually font names. All right, here are some examples of some serif and sans serif fonts found in Microsoft Word. How does processing different types of fonts translate when looking at a full sentence? This sentence, the little red fox turned pink when feeling shy, has 146 lines to decode in the serif font seen on top. Do you see the total over on the right? And 77 lines in the sans serif font seen on the bottom. Logic implies that it takes the brain less effort to decipher sans serif fonts than serif fonts in that second level of cognition when it's decoding and recoding text. If we want to encourage people to remain engaged with our materials, perhaps we would do well to consider using fonts that are more efficient to process. This is the kind of science and thinking that goes into us saying that you should use sans serif instead of serif fonts to help your readers stay engaged with your message. Is there a place for serif fonts? There is. Serif fonts take longer to process, encouraging the reader to slow down and perhaps be more thoughtful about or savor the content. Certain serif fonts have an emotive element that you might want to elicit. Things like diplomas and certificates and invitations. On the other hand, sans serif fonts are less cumbersome and your reader can glide through your content more efficiently. Engaging the reader is one of three elements needed for effective communication. And the other two are that the content needs to be accurately understood and it needs to be easily recalled or retrieved. Let's look at the second of today's findings, the information processing model. It provides some important data that influences these three elements. Some of you might be familiar with this model from your psychology courses. The information processing model shows us what happens cognitively when we see sentences. The stimuli arrow in our diagram refers to the visual messages such as sentences, and the stimuli activates the sensory memory area in our brains. This area can remain active for up to 3 seconds. That means we need to engage the reader within 3 seconds or we will probably lose them. That's important to remember. I'm going to show you two formats, and you don't have to read them. They're to give an overall impression of each format. You'll have a second or two to decide which one you want to read. Are you ready? Did you choose the one on the left or the one on the right? That's your sensory memory at work, deciding whether or not you're interested in reading this thing. Once interested in the format, the reader is more likely to be curious about the content. And when the brain begins to focus on the actual content, working memory kicks into action. So let's go back to the information processing model. During that all-important 3 seconds in sensory memory, most people are able to process 3 to 7 units of information. If this content has engaged them, the brain then moves the information into working memory. And during working memory, the brain is trying to make sense out of what it's seeing. What is this unit? This chunk of information. These individual chunks that the brain is seeing, symbolized here by bricks, are units of information. Other units of information can be attached to the original unit, thereby building more information. So the same bricks can build a wall or a house, depending on how the reader puts them together. Your job is to chunk the information correctly so they build what's on your blueprint. Let's go back to working memory and take a closer look. Note that below the working memory box, it states that the brain can process 7 to 9 chunks within 5 to 15 seconds. If it makes sense within those 5 to 15 seconds, the information starts to become encoded. And the more times the information is repeated, the more likely the information is to be encoded in long-term memory, which then makes it available for retrieval. You have little control over how often a person reads your material, but you can make it easier for them to find or retrieve information within that document by the way you present it. And Sid teaches you how. Have you ever noticed that sometimes you lose your place when reading pages like this? That you have to go back and figure out where you were? Not this one exactly. We'd all get lost in reading this. This is a sample to help you envision long lines of text, not to read this. We see pages like this all the time, and we think nothing of it. But many people lose their place while reading long lines of text. Perhaps it's because our eyes don't read in fluid, straight lines. When we read, our eyes scan in short, jerking movements called saccades. It looks a bit like this. As you read for any purpose, you will employ a series of I stops in what feels like a nanosecond. It happens so fast. And here's what you input into short-term memory. As you read for any purpose, you will employ a series of I stops. You chunk the visual information to create meaning. As you read, for any purpose, you will employ a series of I stops. That amazes me every time I see it, and it happens so fast. Knowing that our eyes move in choppy motions, using shorter text lines may decrease how often readers lose their place, and this in turn may reduce frustration and increase reader engagement, allowing the building of information. Shortening lines is a finding called RSVP, which stands for Rapid Sequential Visual Presentation. To show you how this works, let's use this basic sentence. Shorten lines of text to limit eye movement and increase efficiency. For this sentence to be most effective, we need to break the lines into meaningful phrases, as you see here. Shorten lines of text to limit eye movement and increase efficiency. We could try this. Shorten lines of text to limit eye movement and increase efficiency. No, the phrases do not make sense as easily as shorten lines of text to limit eye movement and increase efficiency. Rapid, sequential, visual presentation. It's important to break the lines into meaningful phrases. So those are the 3 scientific findings of SIDS 17. Visual processing identifies text deconstruction. Information processing encourages several things, including chunking. Rapid sequential visual presentation, RSVP. So let's see how they can guide you when you're creating your documents. Policies are frequently written from the writer's perspective rather than asking, what does the reader need to know to be able to do? We start from a writer's perspective frequently. When your objective is clarity, your approach to your document with the reader in mind, this becomes this. You briefly saw it a few minutes ago. Let's look how information processing and text deconstruction can improve this document. The first thing we do is we change the font to sans serif. Are you watching? This paragraph becomes this. And next, we identify like information in order to chunk it, applying the information processing model and chunking to guide us. The approach that works best for us is to first read the document and identify the main topics. And in this example, we identified 3 main topics: road vehicles, equipment, and all vehicles. We assigned colors to each topic, and then we reread it and applied the appropriate colors to each sentence. This method helps us see where like information is located. And then we cut and paste the sentences so that all similar colors are grouped together. This is called chunking, pulling like items together. And this helps the document become this. Yes, we added images. We cover when and how to use images in our workshops. Do you see the shorter lines? This is one way to utilize rapid sequential visual presentation. Of these 2 documents, one draws your attention, one looks easier to read, yet they both contain the same information. If you catch yourself thinking right about now, there must be more, you are right. Good. Today, we're looking at only 3 of SIDS 17 findings. That's less than 20% of the SID process. Yet, using just these 3 that we talk about today will improve your communications. Let's move on to applying these 3 findings to presentations. If you do them, you know that presentations include 2 distinct and different platforms, the slide and the speaker notes. Let's look at the slide first. Remember to choose your fonts wisely. Do you want a font that's emotive or one that slows them down? Do you want a font that's easy to process? For today's presentation, I've chosen a sans serif, easy to read font. Visual information is chunked into meaning. Remember this? We chunk visual information when we read to create meaning. And in formatting presentation, think in chunks of 2 to 5. Chunk like things together to help your reader's brain make accurate sense of your message. This slide, taken from our workshop, Creating Powerful Presentations, illustrates a diagram that successfully chunks information into units of 2 to 5 on several levels. There are 2 to 5 major units. Each unit has 2 to 5 rows. Within those rows are 2 to 5 boxes. In turn, each box has 2 to 5 elements. Chunk-like things together in groups of 2 to 5 to help your reader's brain make accurate sense of your message. Believe it or not, the slide that defines RSVP is actually an example of rapid sequential visual presentation on a slide. RSVP is one of my favorites, partly because it makes reading easier and faster. I've been using it throughout this talk. Let's look at these 3 findings applied to your speaker notes now. Each time you give a presentation as the speaker, you work with screens designed and created for the audience. And this area, the speaker notes, is for you. Would it be wise to craft your notes to yourself in SID? Say yes. I mean, think of it. You're delivering your best content with skill to inform and influence while monitoring the crowd and adjusting if you need to. And when you glance down, the content you've prepared for yourself should be engaging, give you accurate information, help you recall what you've prepared. Those are the 3 elements of effective communication, by the way: engage, accurately read, and easily recall. Let's zoom in for a second. Having SID in your speaker notes can infuse you with confidence. Everything is right where you need it. You're using a sans serif font in the speaker notes. It's easy to read. You've chunked information: serif, emotive serif, and sans serif. RSVP is working for you. Short lines, stacked, easy to grasp. Do you see a couple of long lines? Yes, you do. The reason for that is simply that there's limited space, and I don't want to be scrolling and looking, so I forfeit a couple of those for expediency. And since this is mine, I have notes and cues here that are just for me, not necessarily SID, but they are for me. These are clicker and animation cues. There's a symbol here to remind me to drop my voice at the end of this sentence. And this one means next slide. SID thrives in your speaker notes, helping you create and deliver more professional presentations. Let's wrap up. We'll go to Q&A by applying those 3 findings to emails. Email, as you know, has internal and external audiences. And what you put in the subject line varies depending on whether the mail is to an internal or an external recipient. Internal emails should identify the action needed in that email. And external emails identify the topic that's relevant to the reader. Let's talk about internal email first. It helps when companies have an agreed upon vocabulary for internal email subject lines. One of our clients came up with these for their internal use, and you'll come up with yours, I'm sure. But they said action in the subject line could mean the reader needs to take some kind of action, possibly by a certain date. It could read, action, Fillmore project by April 30. Request could mean the sender needs approval on something, or needs your input, or needs information on something. It could read request, Fillmore project deadlines. Info could mean the email contains information on subject, but no response is required. It could read info, new employee manual. And thanks could be when the sender wants to express appreciation. It could read thanks, yesterday's meeting. Having a system like this helps employees easily find important emails that would otherwise get buried or even ignored. One of the teams I served on used EOM at the end of a subject line if there was nothing additional in the email itself. End of message. You didn't have to open it. You just marked it, read, and away you went. Subject lines for external emails should identify the topic or subject matter. For instance, your summary for account ending in the last digits of your account number. Or it could say project, collateral brochure invoice. As the recipient, you know what the email is about. Or it could be anniversary open house details. Identify the topic or the subject matter of your external emails. Now, this applies to both. As far as we know, most business emails are still being opened on laptops and desktops. So create your emails with that in mind. Your message should fit within that window frame. In the body of the email, state the reason for the email in the very first line. Instead of building a case for what you're sending and coming to a conclusion, put the conclusion first, followed by the rationale. We say that because most people reading business emails don't have or won't take a lot of time to figure out what your email is about. So tell them right away and provide supporting information in the second paragraph. Limit your message to that initial laptop or desktop screen. If that's not possible, add an attachment with the additional information, mention it in your note, and include searchable keywords in the attachment's file name. If you're referring to other sites, please be sure to link the information, the hyperlink. Verify that link's accuracy and function, yeah, you guessed it, before you click send. Shortening lines to meaningful phrases, RSVP, does not usually work in the email content. And that's due to limitations in current software programs. Lines that are RSVP'd on your computer's full screen can come across as jumbled, convoluted, disconcerting when viewed on smaller screens, as you see here. We'd really like to train software designers in SID so that this doesn't happen. But you don't know what your recipients will read your email on. Will it be landscape or portrait? Split screen? Maybe it's their watch they're reading it on. You just don't know. In our workshop, we provide a list of preliminary questions to help you identify your audience so you can write accordingly. But it generally doesn't include what do you read this material on. One delightful exception to that, an entrepreneur whose business was finding and placing long-term substitute doctors and RNs learned that her website and emails were almost always read by her doctors and RNs on their phones, in hospitals, while walking. And she contracted me to condense her already succinct website copy based on what she learned. It wasn't the normal. So, but use RSVP with care in emails, if at all. So quickly now, let's review. Knowing that text deconstruction exists will help you choose your, go ahead and say it, font. The visual processing model helps us effectively chunk information to help readers understand. Chunk in groups of 2 to 5. And RSVP stands for Rapid Sequential Visual Presentation. It took me too long to learn that, but now it's one of my favorites. All right, you made it. And we have almost 20 minutes remaining for Q&A. That was a lot of information in a short period of time. I want you to think about what you've discovered today. Effective communication. Maybe you can say it these words. Effective communication will put our company, our organization ahead of our peers. Are you thinking that? Or maybe it's stopping to clarify things is costly. Recovering losses from miscommunication is even more so. How do we learn SID? We need this. This is all we're going to say today about how you can learn SID. In person is the best way to learn. So your most effective option is to bring cognitive-based information design on site. A 4-hour SID workshop at your business, organization, or school includes hands-on time to work on your items. To date, workshop sizes have ranged from 3 to 300. We tailor workshops to your group's needs and desired outcomes. And if you'd like, you can add on short-term or extended follow-up coaching. You see, it's cost-effective to bring in a SID expert. Whoops. Let me back up. It's cost-effective to bring a SID expert in because your team doesn't have to travel. When it's time to work on their projects, your team members have the information they need and the tools they use at their fingertips. SID digital courses are video sessions with PDF aids and exercises to work through at your convenience due to our hybrid delivery system with Search.io. If you want to cruise straight through the course, you can, or you can absorb and apply the material one module at a time. You can review whenever and as often as you like. These SID videos are searchable by keyword and phrase, so you can go back and find a segment you want to review. And this means primarily you'll never have to wait for a help desk reply or a chat bot to half answer your question, even if you're working on your course after hours. Included as part of your workshop or course, SID's online community is where new friends just getting started and SID alumni help, encourage, and celebrate each other's progress. When you finish your workshop or complete your course, your SID alumni, we want you to stay current. So we send you applicable updates and stories of applications. You don't have time, nor do we, for hype or fluff. In fact, we teach you how to remove it. So we only send SID alumni pertinent and useful information. When SID becomes a vital tool in your tool chest, SID certification is possible. Workshop alumni can retake live workshops again at no additional cost. You pay for it once. We are the only and we are the original place to learn SID. And our founder is in the room this afternoon. Do you remember me saying that most people use out-of-date methods to create visual messages because they don't know what's been discovered? Well, now you do. Thanks so much for your attention thus far, your participation. You've been great. A couple more pieces, sorry. To stay current with digital course progress and release dates, we'll send this to you later. You can scan that code or use the URL below it. Please explore the sidgroup.com where you'll find descriptions, before and after examples, and testimonials. And do connect with us via email or LinkedIn. All right, we'll come back to you as the host. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. We'll introduce Dr. Lou Tetlin now. We do have 2 questions in the queue. And if you do have any follow-up questions, please put them in the Q&A. First question is, can this information also be used to create better insights into first-party online behavior data marketing based on user behavior on our websites or social media channels?
Well, I think the most basic response to that is that SID does show people how to present data in a way that's more effective. So yes, it can help as long as it's presented the correct way, and we show you how to do that.
Terrific. There was a question, will we have access to this recording after this session? The answer is yes. Yes, you are part of the select few. If you registered for this, you will get the recording. Next question, obviously, let's start at the beginning. How do I start using SID?
Phil, do you want to respond to that?
You learn what you know, what you've learned today, those 3. You're patient with yourself because it requires letting go of some things that you thought were really important. Those traditions, those old things, so you use what you know and you watch your improvement increase. And I think I can say this safely. It's a little bit like learning to play piano. You see the things on YouTube that describe in one afternoon, you can learn this and this and this and this. Yes, you can. But guess what? You will not be in Carnegie Hall anytime soon. SID is a slow process. I've been in it for 8 years now, and I am still learning. And I'm delighting in the fact that I'm still learning as it goes. So you start with what you know, and we set you up with those things. You have a checklist at the end of the workshop that you can use to remind you what you've learned. And then you work through that and go from there. Yeah, so you start with what you learn and go from here. These 3 will help you.
As a former print reporter, I know Times Roman, so I know I've got to jettison that. What are the best sans serif fonts?
Patrick, there's really no research on that. Um, it really comes down to you and the people you're presenting this for. If you're not sure which sans serif to use, try a couple different ones and show it to people and say, which one do you like? That's really at this point the best. There really is very little research on which sans serif would be better.
And I will add to this. There's a high likelihood that your first two choices will actually be serifed fonts. They'll just be smaller serifs.
I'll just start at the very beginning and go with Arial because I know that's at the top of the list. And
one of the
Are there-
good things about Arial, if I can interrupt, is that
Yeah.
it is probably on everybody's computer. Okay, if you choose one that's a little bit more obscure, there's a chance that their machine is going to replace it with something which you don't have control over that. So choosing Arial, which is a standard, it's probably going to be seen the way you intend on their machine.
and will be easier to read.
Mhm.
Are there SID templates that we should be using, and how do I apply SID to my work and projects, that sort of thing? Is there like a template I can just kind of throw in, especially for
No.
like an email?
There really isn't, Patrick. There are no templates because every communication, everything you create is unique to what you're doing and to your audience. But the structure and the way SID is put forward, it's very easy to follow. Like Phil said, we have checklists that once you learn how to do this, you don't have to memorize it. You just have to look at the list and go, oh, did I do this? Did I do that? Did I do that? And then you end up with a format that is based on how your brain processes information. So no
Here's an,
templates.
here's an example. Checklist for print documents, front and back. Laminated, so it's you can keep it at your desk and you just go through as you bring a project to completion and you double check. Not every project uses every SID finding.
But you've already answered the next question. Do you have SID for dummies? And you just showed yes.
Yes, we do.
If you want to, yeah, it's not the right color scheme, but yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Amy. Do you have any research data that shows this approach increases trustworthiness of the content?
I guess I would need a better definition of trustworthiness and whose trustworthiness, the one creating it or the people reading it. Can I have a little more on that?
If it pops up in the Q&A, oh, there we go. Reader trusting the content accuracy. Thank you, Amy.
Okay, all I can say is that I know the people that I've researched and worked with on this immediately assumed that it was accurate and it was easy and they liked it. So I don't think there was ever a question of trusting it. Basically, because of the science it's based on is by preeminent researchers over decades that are highly respected. So what we're using is trusted by the people who are seeing it that I know of. I've never really had anybody question it.
I would add that with the clients that I have worked with where I use SID on their projects, they are giving me accurate information. I'm not changing their information, but I am placing it on the page so that it makes sense faster, sooner, more thoroughly with their readers. So if that trust element of the information itself, that's going to come from the information you're providing. This has to do with how it appears on the page and how it rings true.
So it comes down to the decoding and recoding. Another follow-up question, is there any impact on misinformation and disinformation of the message or content?
Well, we do know that the SID formats limit the misinformation and the disinformation. Basically because of the way it's being presented, it's being interpreted more correctly. So there's less likely to be misinformation or misconstruction of information.
We use a term in SID called flexible information and stable information. And what we're targeting is the stable information. It's a little bit, it feels to me, it's not SID, but it feels to me parental. If there's only one way to get my instructions, then you know you're going to get compliance on the other end. And that's what you're trying to do for your reader. There's only one way to understand this. That's what you're striving to build. When we were talking about the chunking, you can build a wall or you can build a house. Our job, your job, if you're the one creating the project, is to help them put that information together so they build what's on your blueprint. That's when you really know you've got success.
And when you don't have success, they've torn your building down.
Yeah, planes crash, buildings go down. Yes.
Bad things happen. Want to toss this out to folks if you wanted to put it in the chat. You know, what do you think about SID now that you've learned a little bit about it? And do you plan to use it right away? And while we're waiting for the chat, there's another question. Am I correct in assuming these principles also help deliver better accessibility for visually impaired readers? And it seems that it would pair well with accessible reading technology.
I would say yes, your assumption is correct. Also, we do know that these kind of formats also help dyslexic readers and to a lesser degree, autistic readers. Autistic readers have a lot of other elements that they need to be working with to really be effective. But there are some things in SID formats that will help autistic, and definitely dyslexic readers will find SID formats more comfortable to read, more accessible. They will understand it more readily than the traditional way we've been presenting information.
That's good to know, since I do have a son who is dyslexic, and it seems to run in the family. So that is good to know. If there are any other questions, we've got about 3 minutes left, and we want to make good use of the time. And we have an audience of very shy people. What's the one takeaway that you would want our audience today to, you know, once they log off of this and they walk in to talk to their supervisor, what message do you want them to convey about SID and the training you provide?
That there's a new, almost revolutionary way of creating information that will, as Phil says, turn your writing upside right. It's going to make things much easier and more effective for the people you need to communicate with. Phil, did you have anything?
I was just going to add, it is a determination initially that, yes, this is valid. I'm going to adopt this. But at the very same time, you can't adopt it all at once. So you start with what you know, and that's what the 4-hour workshop is intended to do. And as you do those things, then it grows and it spreads, and you say, oh my. There's a word I use. It's an informal word, SID-fluenced, which means on certain text-only documents, I use maybe a handful of SID findings to help improve that document because it doesn't have pictures. It doesn't have a number of those other things. So it will help in many regards. But that first thing is, this is valid. I need to learn enough about it to adopt it.
We do have a message in the chat that says, I work in a very technical environment and often need to simplify technical information for non-technical audiences. SID will be very helpful.
Yes.
Great.
Anybody work with engineers?
Oh, yes, yes. I remember this one group I worked with, 13 PhD engineers. And I thought, you know, remember the figure at the beginning about 13%? Well, there were these people in this room. And I figured, well, they must have all been efficient at reading text. And I said, now, you know, How many of you are comfortable reading text? And only one hand in the room went up. And these were all PhD engineers. And so it sort of verified that finding. There was only one person, and everybody in that room knew who that person was, because as he raised his hands, everybody else's fingers went and pointed at him. They knew he was the guy that knew how to read text. All of them were not text-based readers, just like the percentage said. So yeah, this is really great for engineers.
I did find in my career, I worked with scientists and engineers and found that if I could show them the data or studies about something, they would accept that. But just as a communications person, explaining how things would work, it didn't have any truth to it. But once I showed them the data and showed them the studies, won them over immediately, and they accepted it. So I'm looking forward to working with you more and learning more about SID. But with that, we're out of time. I'd like to, on behalf of PRSA's Midwest District, thank Dr. Lou Tetlin and Phil Ransom from the SID Group for this presentation. You can find more information about SID at their website, the SID Group, that's THECIDGROUP.com. And with that, thank you for joining us. Have a great day.
Take care, all.